So live and on day 3 of wine and a book, but I've actually got water tonight because I've not actually had much to eat today, so wine needs to be done with care. So yeah, I'll toast you anyway with water. Cheers, health, wealth, happiness, and entertainment. So this evening is all about my grandmother's book, following on from my grandfather's book yesterday. And so this evening is about my grandmother's book. Sophie and Edwardian Childhood. She was the daughter of Edmund Blair Leighton, the artist, who is still around. His paintings are still around. They're used in Arthurian themes and Arthurian books. So this is what we'll call Godspeed, this particular painting, which predates my grandmother. My great-grandmother was 45 when she finally had Sophie, her daughter, and she'd had a bit of a problem when she had her son 17 years prior to Sophie's appearance in the world. And according to this book, it was Elizabeth Barrett Browning who actually sorted out how it was possible for her to have a baby after having had several problems. And along comes surprise Sophie at 45. Eric was 17 when she was born, so she had a perplexing childhood. Anyway, they lived in Bedford Park in Chiswick, and the families had all bought houses around at the time that Bedford Park was actually starting up as a Norman Shaw and other arts and crafts architects. So they lived in a number of different houses. So living with a painter father. I'm going to have to try and wave various bits of the book in front so that you can see some photographs that my uncle put in. All right, so my parents' first home after they were married was one of the smaller Bedford Park houses. But after a few years, they moved to 14 Priory Road, where I was brought up and where Papa remained for the rest of his life. What's quite amusing is that actually they moved into 7 Priory Road, which got renumbered to 14 Priory Road, and it is now I think it's 14. It may not. I think it's 14 Priory Avenue. There is now a Priory Road with some funny little 2 up, 2 downs, and the idea of a family of 4 with all the servants that they also had in order to sort out being an artist in those days did rather bewilder me until I looked at the old maps and saw that Priory Avenue is what was Priory Road. Anyway, sorry, that's an aside. There'll be a few of those. Every painter has to have a studio to work in, and my father had his at home at the bottom of the garden. It was really rather like a museum. One entire wall was hung with old musical instruments, and others were laid out on a high shelf which ran around the room. I recall an arch lute, a serpent, an Indian harp, and banjos of every shape and national origin. My father had played the guitar in his youth and still had 2 fine instruments. My father had one of them that he kept in the attic when we were little. The studio was entered from the oak-panelled hallway, which had carved oak cupboards where steel helmets and other small pieces of armour were displayed. These had been collected for use in paintings of historical subjects. A heavy soundproof door, and then another at the foot of two steps, led into a large anteroom with glass sidewalls and roof used for posing figures for out-of-doors scenes. From this, a series of large folding doors opened into the studio, an ample room about 30 feet long by 20 feet wide. So that's one of the photographs of the studio. She also did a painting of the gallery. Although this was his working area where an entire scene might be built, maids were under strict orders never to touch anything. It was as well kept as a drawing room with its polished pine strip flooring and Persian carpets. I remember one funny incident with those carpets. I suppose I was about 3 at the time. After tea at about 5 o'clock, I was allowed down to visit my father in the studio. In those days, the streets outside were quagmires on wet days, and there was one particular muddy place where people had to cross to gain entrance to the common. An old man with a broom used to sweep a path through the mud and horse droppings if you paid him a penny, and it was my proud privilege to hand it to him. Indoors in the studio, my father was very amused one day to see me busy pretending to make a crossing on the polished floor between the rugs. I was using one of his set squares as a broom, so he got another set square and joined in, saying things like, "Ooh, I'm getting a lot of mud here." When I heard him say this, I would immediately drop my set square, broom, and take over his. He was very good at playing with me in the studio. There was an old chest there, and in it were lovely lengths of the fabulous silk fabrics Papa used for backgrounds in some of his paintings. When I was a little older, he would sometimes open the chest and play with me at shops. Heaven for a small girl. At the far end of the studio were 3 deep recesses beneath the balustraded balcony. In the central recess was the fireplace with deep-silled windows on either side. One held a display of antique glass bottles, the other my mother's extensive collection of pewter. Sofas, hard and unyielding, stood against the side walls, and above them were hung dueling pistols of every shape and kind with engraved silver butts. Never ever met any of those. They'd long disappeared. A half-sized billiard table was upended against a wall of the right-hand recess from which a flight of stairs led to the gallery. In the left-hand recess, behind a tapestry curtain, lurked a life-size, jointed, bald-headed artist's model with a pink stocking-covered body. Beyond this lay a well-stocked workshop with a bench and a huge cupboard. Another door led to a changing room for his models, complete with basin and separate lavatory, and beyond that you could go through a small greenhouse out into the garden. So this is the man himself. Where are we? There. Because Papa painted pictures set in earlier historical periods, he collected genuine costumes whenever possible, and if none could be found, accurate replicas would be made. For this, a dressmaker would regularly come in daily for about 2 weeks at a time. A room on the top floor was taken over where she and my mother would make costumes based on fashion prints of the period or authentic contemporary drawings. They were undefeated and not only made beautiful dresses, carefully measured and fitted for the female models, but also entire male outfits. Some of the fabrics had elaborate patterns, which my mother painted on with loving care. So that may have been painted on. My grandmother still had the dresses, some of the dresses, in a sort of select dressing up box that we weren't often allowed to get anywhere near. But I do remember one lovely occasion when I and my two girl cousins were up in the craft room, I suppose she had it, and we got to try on those beautiful dresses shortly before she sold them to pay for an operation for my father. Papa first sketched the costumes from his live models in some detail so that the garments could be transferred to the dummy with the arrangement of the folds copied as nearly as possible. There they could be left in place until that part of the painting was complete. When more light was needed for a painting, a huge bookcase could be moved from a south window. This was done for the painting called Prince Arthur Learning to Read. For this work, a complete mock-up of a stone-pillared window was also erected to enable the light and reflections to be represented as accurately as possible. They used to do all sorts of weird stage set antics in order to come up with it. So trying to identify where some of the settings are in his paintings can be a bit of a challenge. As well as the annual large work for the Academy, Papa produced many smaller paintings, some on canvas, others on wooden panels. Many of these would be studies, but others were painted out of doors with the figures added in the studio. He was always impeccably dressed, and while painting would just slip on a grey alpaca coat, which was loose and washable. He never spilled paint or made a mess. In fact, one model said that she could not believe Papa was an artist when she first saw him. He was too clean. My father laughed and replied that he had noticed that as artists get better, they get cleaner. Papa always went for a walk before starting work, and when he had finished work and carefully washed his brushes, he walked again before the evening meal. He used to say that most of the artists who had been successful were those who had maintained strict mental discipline. However, in his case, this discipline was only imposed on himself and not upon his family and friends. He loved children and animals and always took a dog with him on his walks. When out walking, he was very observant, and this, combined with his quest for suitable models, led to some embarrassing moments when his interest in certain handsome ladies was misunderstood. So great was his desire for female perfection that he would sometimes combine the face of one girl and the figure of another, thereby achieving a result that was perhaps too good to be true. I found that his informal portraits and sketches had far more real character. And one of the examples of this is on the back of the book, which is called The Signing of the Register, and it is in Bristol, I think. It's either Bristol or Cardiff or both. And so the model for that was my grandmother. It's her body, her arms, her hand, but her devoted father didn't think she was pretty enough. So her cousin was the head. There is an oil sketch somewhere out in the big wide world which shows much more my grandmother. And my cousins believe that the little girl in blue is her cousin, Joyce, their grandmother, and she was her mother's brother's daughter. So her mother was the eldest, and Frank, Joyce's father, the youngest, and I think there was either 17 or 18 years difference between them. So there's definitely some sort of strange thing going on in the family line at that point. My grandmother managed to just have her children in normal order. Right, where are we? Every year, before sending in day for the Royal Academy exhibition at the beginning of April, Papa and many of the better-known painters in London had private shows of their work. Invitation cards were sent out for a certain date, and during the afternoon of that day there would be a continuous stream of arrivals, mainly potential buyers and interested friends. The maids were kept busy ushering in the visitors and handing around tea, which was served in the dining room. I suppose that in a way I was on show too, at an early age, although I was quite unconscious of the fact. As I grew older, I was expected to help entertain and look after the visitors and take them through to the studio before they had their tea. The entertaining and hostessing of large parties was a matter of course for children from my background, and although we may not always have liked it, it did stand us in good stead in later life. Sometimes over 150 people would call in one afternoon, so I was kept fully occupied. My cousin would also help, and we got considerable amusement from comparing notes about the comments visitors made. One which cropped up fairly often, usually expressed by someone who had little genuine interest in the paintings, was, "What a beautiful frame!" Anyway, the majority of the book is about Sophie, but that is a fascinating insight into how her father worked as an artist in early 20th century London, but she was born in 1902. So many of his paintings predate her, but he died in 1922. So there's a good sort of run in the early 20th century. So yeah, it's a lovely little book. My uncle thought that it was a children's book. I really don't. I don't think it is a children's book, not modern children, but it is a book that has fascinated people who are interested in history, interested in London history, interested in Norfolk history, just interested in social history and also in art. And it's a different part of things to the urchin type story. Much more in keeping, I suppose, with Winnie the Pooh or something like that. And of course, she does have lots of cuddly toys in her arms on the cover. Another bizarre thing that my uncle did was he changed her name. So he published it under the name of Sophie Leighton Harding, which was never ever her name. She was Sophie Helen Blair Leighton, who became Sophie Helen Blair Harding. Blair Leighton as a hyphenated name was something that her brother did, not she or her father or her grandfather. Anyway, thank you very much for watching and for joining me. And tomorrow night is a strange romp through the happenings between 1609 and 1632 that relate to a painting that I've been investigating, and yeah, it's really quite. We think a lot has happened in our lifetimes, and looking back to then, the time known as the Renaissance, although apparently according to something this morning it's no longer called the Renaissance. Anyway, it was new knowledge, or the discovery of knowledge. Anyway, you've got Galileo, you've got all sorts of weird and wonderful things happening in Florence and around the world and in Europe, and it'll probably end up by being a bit of a list, but it's really quite jaw-dropping, all the things that happened in that short lifetime. Anyway, thank you very much for watching, and have a glorious evening. It's actually sunny outside for a change, although there are clouds. So another cheers in water, and all the best. Thank you. And good night.